Good evening. Welcome to the Wednesday, July 24th, 2019 meeting of the Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission. And I'd like to begin with item 1, which is approval of the minutes from our June 26th meeting, noting that our July meeting was canceled, early July meeting was canceled. Are there any additions, corrections, questions? Not? Looks good. I hear a motion to approve.
So moved.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Second?
Second.
Thank you, Victoria. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Since I read the minutes, I won't abstain. Okay, item 2 is public comment. It's an opportunity for members of the public to speak to the commission about items that aren't before us tonight or currently is pending. Does anyone wish to speak during the open mic time? Okay, we have people in the audience, but not for that purpose. Okay. Moving on to item 3, approval of reason statement of relevant criteria and standards for 2 different projects, and Mike's going to present with that. Thank you. Mike Ray.
Yeah, these documents are attached to your packet. This is just what we had heard at our last meeting. So it was the rezone of the Clyde property on South Highway 95 from ag forest to motor business. And then the second RCS is the Paradise View Edition preliminary subdivision plat on Nursery Street. And those are both attached to your packets. And if you have any questions.
Do you want us to deal with them separately? Like, well, why don't we begin with the first one, which is for the 4.4
Sure. acre
parcel. Does anybody have any comments on the relevant criteria and standards for that? They look good to me, but, okay, so do I hear a motion to approve as,
Move to approve.
and to forward to, in this case, they're both in, let's see.
Are
this
we
one-
doing each one separately? Do you want to do
Yeah,
each?
I think we should, yeah. So, anyway, does anybody want to word the motion that way? Or do you wanna read-
I move to approve.
Okay,
I need a second.
okay. You move to approve the first one, which is the rezone of the 4.4, well,
For the,
for the 2400
Right.
South Highway 95. Okay, just to clarify.
second.
Okay, and within the area of city impact. So there's a second from Mike. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, so this will get forwarded then to the planning, the Latah County Planning Commission, correct? So,
Yeah,
Yeah.
the first one will, correct.
yeah, okay. So that's why I thought we better separate them, maybe. So, item 2, a proposal for preliminary subdivision plat of a 1.49 acre parcel located at 1924 Nursery Street, Paradise View Edition. Are there any comments on that?
All good. Move to approve.
Okay, thank you, Victoria. Is there a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, Mike. And anyway, still jet lag, sorry about that, Dennis. Anyway, everybody got scrambled around in names tonight, including me. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, thank you. So I guess that one goes forward to City Council. So item 4 is a public hearing, and we'll begin with a presentation by Mike Ray on the proposed conditional use permit application to expand an existing recreational vehicle park at 1651 Carmichael Road in the area of city impact.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Commissioners. So this is the Rambler RV Park, proposing to expand into an area that was previously approved for storage of recreational vehicles. So they currently have an existing 21-acre RV park, or not 21-acre, 21-space, RV park. It's a little over 4.85 acres in size within the area city impact. 13 RV spaces are proposed to be full hookups, and an additional 13 spaces or only electrical connections are proposed as well. And then according to the ACI agreement, we're required to recommend a recommendation to Latah County, and they will make the final decision. So the northernmost portion of this property is about 3 acres in size, and that was, before it got converted to an RV park, was historically used as a mobile home park. Back in 2010, there was a special use permit that was approved for the transition of that use into 15-space RV park, using the existing infrastructure of the mobile home park. And then again, in 2014, there was an expansion request that was approved through a special use permit to add 6 RV spaces, which brings the total up to 21. And then in 2016, there was a rezone request that was submitted for the adjacent property, 1.9 acre parcel to the southwest, and it was to rezone it from R4 multifamily residential to the ag forest zone, and that was to facilitate a conditional use permit to allow for RV storage within that area. And then the applicant developed the 1.9 acre portion of the property within a large gravel parking area, and there's a stormwater detention pond to the west of the site, and there was allowed RV storage on that property. And so this is where we're at. We got Troy Highway here to the north. Ridgeview Estates second edition is currently platted but not developed. This is Ridgeview Estates first. This would be in the city limits boundary running to the west side here as well as up on Troy Highway. Carmichael Road here is running north-south. We got Tomer Road east-west here. This is the entrance to the park. There's a well house here, but you enter the park and this would be the area that's currently being used as RV storage. Looking at the comp plan designation, this whole entire area is designated as auto urban residential, except for Latah Trail, which is designated as parks and open space here to the north, as well as a future park property within Ridgeview Estates second and a linear stormwater swale here adjacent to the highway. Looking at the zoning configuration, like I mentioned before, the smaller portion of the property was rezoned to ag forest, but the main portion of this property is in the R4 zone, as well as some other properties here adjacent to Carmichael Road. You have various uses. There's multifamily apartment complexes. There's mobile home parks here to the south along Palouse River Drive, various other rural residential uses. The undeveloped property here to the west is agricultural forestry, and then the different combinations of zones here, Ridgeview Estates second, there's a portion that's R3, which allows for duplexes, twin homes, townhouses, and then it transitions into a single-family zone, which is the R2 zone. And then there's still a pocket of properties here that are in suburban residential, and those are located out in the county still. So the R4 zone really provides for the most intense residential land uses permitted in the community. We look towards adequate transportation access. And then the ag forest zone is really just intended to foster agriculture or forestry land uses, providing for limited low-density residential uses which don't conflict with farm and forest practices, nor place inappropriate demands on rural public services, nor promote the indiscriminate conversion of farm and forest land to other uses. And RV parks, whether or not they're in the R4 ag forest zones, are conditionally permitted uses. So this is just a closer view of the property. So we have the existing 21 spaces in this northern portion. There's a kind of a fire truck turnaround here at the end, refuse container location here as well. There's a dumpster. And then this is the area that's currently being used as RV storage. This was previously the stormwater detention pond here to the west. They've got designated spaces here. There are numerous lights, freestanding lights, think one here, and one here, that light up this area. And this would be the applicant's proposal. They have a revised stormwater detention plan, which ends up using the existing orifice for the stormwater pond that could be filled in with gravel, and then it just ends up seeping into the ground and catching within that orifice and being able to convey it onto the adjacent property after it's detained. And so they'll be able to fill the rest of this area in with gravel. They're proposing on having full hookups in these spaces as well as these spaces here. There's 6 here and 7 here, and then there's 10 feet that's required to be between each recreational vehicle. And there'll be green strips. There's a type A landscape buffer that's required here to the west. They already have a 6-foot tall fence that slatted fence here to the south, as well as the east, and then to the south along the existing vehicle park. There are fences up here to the north, and there's a slight slope here where they used to level this portion out, and that slopes up towards the fence, and that's some green area as well. So looking at our RV park standards, so we require that each RV space be at least 40 by 20. But we do allow up to a certain percentage of those to be 25 by 20. It's 40%. The applicant's proposing that all of these spaces be 40 by 20. And then there is an additional 13 spaces that only have electrical connections that are about 40 by 22. So all of those meet the minimum for the standard RV space. Space design, so that needs to be 10 feet between those spaces, and the way they've laid it out, they have 10 feet between all those spaces. And then toilet facilities and potable water. So all RV facilities which allow tents or recreational vehicles but are not self-contained are required to provide toilet facilities and potable water. And then the applicant's not proposing to allow those types of tents and RVs, but there is potable water connections via private well on this property. Common open space, so this is really, it's required, but it's left up to the discretion of the developer. The setback areas need to be developed with turf and trees. Size of the open space is left up to the discretion. The applicant previously provided a little less than an acre of contiguous open space, and that was that northern portion that was adjacent to the trail in the northeast corner of the property. And then there's adjacent open space within the setbacks that completely surround the park as well. And trash receptacles can't exceed 150 feet from any RV space. The applicants proposed to locate another dumpster within this expanded area, which would meet the 150 feet space limitation there. And so they would meet all those requirements also. Then adjoining public streets, they're required to have a type B landscape buffer. The only adjoining public street is going to be Carmichael Road. They have an existing landscape buffer which more than satisfies the type B requirement. From the road, you can't see through it except for the entrance to the park, and so it more than satisfies that. And then adjacent to residential and industrial uses, they just need to have a minimum setback of 10 feet from the property line, have a 6-foot high fence, so we've got that about 900 feet along the southern property line, and then you've got some portions along the northwestern where there's a 6-foot high fence that would satisfy that requirement. And then adjoining undeveloped land, so really just the ag forest, larger property to the west, they're required to have a type A landscape buffer. And so the applicant in their plans has accommodated the space for the type A buffer over there. So that'll be a certain number of trees, 2 canopy trees, 4 understory trees, and 6 shrubs per every 100 lineal feet within that buffer. And so with that, that'll meet that requirement. And then the last for landscaping, they're required to have at least 1 canopy tree of 1.5 caliper and 2 shrubs, a minimum of 12 inches in height per every 2 RV spaces. And then all common areas not utilized for kind of the parking or other landscaping shall be covered with turf or other vegetative ground cover. So the applicants indicated that there would be a tree and some shrubs and green strips between each RV space on the west side, as well as surrounding the perimeter of the expanded area. And then so a total of 13 trees, 26 shrubs will be needed to be provided within the expanded area. So we'll just have, if Lake County were to approve this, they'll need to make sure that those are all in place. Internal streets required to be 28 feet wide, which includes a 20-foot surface with 4-foot gravel shoulders on either side, and the applicant's expanded area has 40-foot wide internal access drives, and those exceed the requirement. And they also have 3 freestanding lights within the expanded area, in addition to 2 existing freestanding lights within the current park. And then we think that 3 should be more than sufficient for lighting up that area. And then the utilities really just served off of the Southeast Sewer District, and then there's a well out there as well serving this property because it is in the county. So these are just some views. These were taken previously when the expansion occurred. So this is looking at Carmichael's over here. This type B buffer has grown quite a bit since then, but you can see the existing vegetation that was there. This is the existing park. That's looking northeast. There's the well house, and that's Carmichael there. And this would be the open space area. So the well house is here, and then the RV park is here, and then this is the open space area, and you can see Lake Tahoe Trail off in the distance here. This is a view of the kind of expanded area where they're looking at. These would be the spaces that would just have electrical connections. And then this is looking to the southeast. You can see the little bit of elevation change here where they had to cut the bank. And then that's the solid fence that runs all along the east and the south side of this property. So staff recommends Moscow Planning and Zoning Commission put forth a recommendation of approval of the CUP for the expansion of the RV park at 1651 Carmichael Road to Lake Tahoe County with the following condition: that the applicant provide landscaping in the expanded RV park area at a ratio of 1 canopy tree and 2 shrubs every 2 RV spaces within 90 days of final approval from Lake Tahoe County. And I'd certainly be able to answer any questions you might have.
Does anybody have any questions? Seem pretty thorough. Okay. All right. Well,
So nothing would change, everything you've read would be a requirement in the city or out of the city, either one, right?
Yeah, Lake Tahoe County's adopted our RV park code, so this is our ordinance right now.
Okay.
So yeah, everything would apply, whether it's developed in the city or outside of the city currently.
Right. Other questions, anybody? All right, thank you, Mike. I guess we'll now open the public hearing, and would anyone like to speak on behalf of the project? Would anybody like to speak either opposed or just generally speak about the project?
You want me to say anything?
Yeah, you better go up there and say something.
Okay. So you just need to introduce yourself and give us your address and for the record.
Hello, my name is Dan Mack, my brother Jeff Mack. We're the owners and also the developers. And we have been it's been a continuous workstation for me for the last 9 years. And we've just been trying to keep up with demand. And people that come here, either they're mad at us for not having enough, or it's too bright, or so we're really giving the community something that brings in an economy, and also a lot of the football games, people can make reservations. We reserve the power only spots, and during the football games, those things are pretty full, so there is a high demand for it. We just heard that Walmart in Pullman decided to not let RVs park there anymore, and that was, when I saw it full, it was approximately over 100
Well,
in the parking lot. And so people were showing up on Tuesdays for a Saturday game and blocking out the whole parking lot. So there's an overflow that is coming our way. And we, not only for football games, but contractors, people that come to town that don't live here, a lot of nurses, students come here. Some of the parents found out a pretty good ingenious way of not paying for their housing and having equity in a RV when they're done with school. And other than that, every year we just keep polishing. So.
okay. Are there any questions for Ken? Okay, for Mr. Mack, thank you.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak? Okay, with that, I will close the public hearing, and we'll proceed with some comments or a motion, however people are inclined.
I move to approve.
The conditional use permit? Okay. Is there a second?
With
With what's recommended by staff in terms of the landscaping requirement of one canopy tree,
Two shrubs.
and 2 shrubs per
RV
space.
spaces.
Yeah. Per space, correct.
Per every 2 spaces.
Every
is
2
what it
spaces,
is.
sorry, yeah. Okay, so with that concluded,
I'll second.
thank you, Dennis. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Okay, thank you. All right. So,
Chair,
yes.
and then just direct staff to prepare the RCF.
Oh, yes, sorry about that. And yes, would you, okay. Do you want a motion for that? Okay.
Please.
Sorry about that. Do I hear a motion for preparing, directing staff to prepare standards and criteria?
So moved.
Okay, second. Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, sorry about that, I forgot that piece. All right, so. All right, item 5, which is accessory dwelling units, draft ordinance, and Mike will present. Thank you. Thank you, okay.
Build more. Build faster.
Yeah, I guess we need it, there's a demand, that's for sure. Yeah.
So this is just our continued discussion about the accessory dwelling units and possibly just revising the minimum lot size requirement. I won't go through unless people want to stop again, but we went through this the last couple times of kind of the examples of what we've been seeing and what's been permitted ever since these were approved. And I think last time, of course, yeah, we looked at all the lots, didn't meet the minimum lot size. And then we went back through kind of the original work that we had done with the survey and just the results of the survey that indicated just the strong support. And really what we were seeing with ADUs was that, people don't necessarily are running out the door to get one, but they don't necessarily have an issue with people in their neighborhood having them. And so we looked at these results before of the citizen survey that sent out the question of just, question of supporting ADUs in the neighborhood and just seeing the, large percentage kind of in the older areas of town. And then, this is, I think, an indicator, a response percentage for strongly disagree and disagree to a question of supporting ADUs in my neighborhood. So, these are all really low percentages of people that disagree for a lot of the areas that have the non-conforming lots within them. And then I think this is just an indication of what we've seen, that, we've permitted maybe 2, 3 a year ever since they were allowed with the ordinance. And it's just an indicator of, people that they're likely to add an accessory dwelling unit to their property. It's still fairly low, and I think that really there's a need there that, would drive people to create one on the property, whether it be an elderly family member, additional income, one of those reasons.
I find go back to that slide, Mike, it's a little, it seems just a little strange that you would expect that the development east of Mountain View being done in a more modern way would probably be less likely to, the structure of our historic districts with alleys and what have you make it much more liable to find that interesting. Yet there's 10% of the people in that past Mountain View that are saying they would consider it. I find that a little bit just a little bit interesting to notice that, because the percentage that were against the idea was significant, and yet it,
It's higher, yeah.
well, let's see, when did, there was a larger number there.
That was
What did I miss? I thought 29%, yeah,
So they agreed.
So
with
that's a
the-
lower, yeah, supporting, the support's less there.
yeah, I see.
And the, you know, they strongly disagree to the
Yeah,
question of
maybe
supporting, so
I'm
you know,
mixed up a little bit.
well, the percentage is higher here for strongly disagreeing to allowing ADUs in their neighborhood. So that is a lot higher than, you know, the rest of these areas, with the exception of the southern area. But you know, what we've seen is, yeah, these areas are a lot more conducive to having the garage, you know, rear garage and
Right,
the alley
exactly.
access. But all of these areas are usually a
bigger
lot
lots.
larger homes, and most of them have daylight basements because of the rolling hills.
Right.
So they're always, you know, some type of daylight off the front or off the back, and so they usually have a lot of floor area within the homes. And you know, the kind of daylight basement's perfect for having you know, some type of you know, ADU on the bottom with their own entrance, because they can
Right,
walk around the
right.
back. And so those are primarily, you know, in these areas where they're newer homes, and then these areas where they're newer homes, that's primarily what we see, is that they're usually within the existing home instead of detached
Right,
within
right.
a garage.
They're not really adding square footage, they're just redividing. it.
Redividing, you know, maybe an area, I mean, a lot of them have maybe unfinished basements and a lot of areas that's unusable just because of the large square footage, and then they're, you know, accommodating an ADU within that space.
I think the low-interest money in the last decade has certainly suggested to people that they build bigger houses than they probably need. You know, it's, oh, what the heck, let's go ahead. I mean, you see more smaller homes probably in the older districts. Well, I'm continue to be positive about what we're offering.
Yeah.
Yeah. Other comments?
And then so we went through, you know, kind of the common elements before, and, you know, we talked about, you know, we were looking at these 6, and, you know, design and location of entrances, you know, there wasn't really a whole lot of support for, you know, imposing those requirements on them. But if you look at owner occupancy, off-street parking, maximum occupancy, and maximum size, you know, quite a bit of support as far as extremely important or very important for these 4 elements. And so that's why we ended up inserting those requirements within the code. And so this is the draft ordinance. So I think last time I was given the direction to go ahead and move forward with an ordinance that would just strike that one sentence about requirement to meet the minimum lot size for single-family dwellings shall be eligible for an accessory dwelling unit. And so really would just be, you know, proposing to keep the rest of the section entirely the same. So there'd still be, you know, the size limitation, the maximum occupancy, the owner occupancy, and the off-street parking requirement, but we just do away with the minimum lot size requirement. So.
Comments on that? Looks good. So you would like further direction, and what would you like to do next that we should
Well,
direct you
yeah, I mean, the
toward?
next, if everybody's comfortable with that, I think the next step would just be queuing it up for public hearing. And, I mean, it's a simple ordinance, that would
Right.
just be it right there, so.
Is everybody ready for that?
Yeah, I'm ready for that.
I think we've,
Did I hear the word setback?
Nope.
I thought we talked about that before.
Setbacks are already,
They're
In
already
place.
with the property, and so it is, that's what I'm just verifying, that it's contained within the,
Yeah, the setbacks are the setbacks, so nothing's changing there.
just double checking.
good job, girl.
Right, so that might, given the size of the property, that might limit the actual size of the ADU even beyond
Even
what-
more.
Right, so, and the height limit too, the plate height limit too. Okay, I think we're ready. Yes, Brandy?
I have one question, just, I know you mentioned this before, but just as a reminder, what was the minimum, or what currently is the minimum lot size that you're considering removing? Do you know offhand?
Well, it just depends on the zoning district.
Oh,
So it would just be,
Okay.
yeah, it would just be the minimum lot size for the respective zone.
Thank you.
So it varies, yeah. I mean, R4, 5,000, R3, 6,000, and R2, 7,000.
Any other questions? All right, so I think we'll look forward to going forward with that change for public hearing.
Okay.
All right, when do you think that will be, like,
Next time.
I think we can probably make the second meeting in August.
okay, yeah.
So we do have a lot size requirement, or we don't now? That,
So
we're
it's-
we're leaning towards don't, right?
We do.
We
We do have a
do
lot
have a-
size requirement for all properties in town. It's just that if a property doesn't meet the minimum lot size, they were previously ineligible for an ADU. And now we're striking that and saying that even if a property, you have to be a single-family dwelling to be eligible for an ADU.
Huh?
But we're saying that if you're a single-family dwelling and you don't meet the minimum lot size, then you're still eligible for an ADU. That's what this would accomplish.
Many of
Yeah.
these were developed at a time when
Lot
the
sizes were
minimum
small.
lot size was different or non-existent.
Right,
Yeah.
so they might be shy by 500 feet or something, right, a lot of them.
Yeah.
So then no lot size for for accessory dwelling unit then, right? I mean, if they want to make a box this big, they can make it if the setback fits, right?
It still has to be 600 square feet max, or the percentage
The
of,
size of the accessory dwelling unit's still limited to 40%, 600 square feet or 40% of the floor area of the main dwelling.
Yeah, 40%.
But these
that's what it
lots
was.
are already created, right? So there's some lots that are surrounding, like East City Park, that were created at a time where the minimum lot size for the zone was 6,250 square feet. And the city had subsequently gone in and rezoned that area or changed the lot size, and now it's 7,000. So they don't meet the minimum lot size by 750 square feet, but the way it currently exists is these lots aren't eligible for an ADU, even though they were created legally and the city changed the code to bring them out of, pretty much out of conformance. And so we're saying that now they would be allowed to do an ADU if that was the case.
Okay, perfect.
okay. Other comments or questions? Excuse me. All right, so we move on to item 6, which is kind of our continuing ed, and there are 2 articles on it, essentially dealing with a form of density and development, and Nils Peterson forwarded one of them to us, the neighbor's dilemma, and I sent you the density without zoning one, so Nils, you're welcome to participate in this if you would like. In fact, starting with, I guess, just comment, since we're working on our subdivision ordinance, and density is a part of that, and understanding density. And density, as Nels and I know, is sort of an elusive, people have a prejudice around the word, and you have to be careful how you use it. When I know when I worked with students in community settings, if they go in and say, yeah, we want to increase your density, it was like, ugh, because you have to kind of explain why and why that would be beneficial, and what the real positives are if in that case. And I think this, well, you can join in, Nils, but this article really points to really neighborhoods that are expanding and that are pretty much auto-oriented, so they don't have other means of transportation, and so the concern around adding more houses surrounds congestion and traffic and issues along those lines is what I basically took out of it, but
Where did the article come from?
Strong Towns,
Where did?
Strong Towns, the
Oh,
website.
uh-huh.
so it's, and did you get a chance, if you didn't get a chance to read it, basically, to summarize, it talks about a building in the county of Sarasota, I believe, and sort of the resistance to developing land that's vacant, that's contiguous with the development, and really it would be logically developed as, but people are used to that open space being there, even though the open space is just a, empty, uncared for lot. And the objections overwhelmingly seem to be, or the pattern is that it will create, adding 30 more houses to 400 something subdivision will end up adding 30 more cars of traffic, going back and forth. And there's no real alternative to get back and forth to the neighborhood. And it also tends to be arterialized, where we talked about in our subdivision ordinance having multiple linkages and output, input, or whatever, entries, I forget what we call them, but anyway.
Access points.
Access points, thank you. And in this case, they're severely restricted, and that creates even more problems for people who live along that, so. I don't know, what else would you like? You sent it to us for a reason, so do you want to jump in?
I sent you several, let me look at it real quick,
Well, okay, well, this one, yeah, here.
see what it is that I thought was so brilliant about it.
But this would be an example of the area that's, this is a certain density, and then this is an area that logically would develop, but people are resisting.
I suppose, I don't know if, I didn't read the article yet, so I could be out of touch. I just got back from 3 weeks in France, and I'm, you can't help but notice they have a different attitude about life in many ways. And one of the things that you see is not only are villages more compact, smaller places. I mean, the issue is, what about a town like Moscow? We're a little town. Everybody thinks everything should be tiny, and if we're going to have identity built in Moscow, people get kind of exhorted about, gee, that doesn't look like the Moscow that I dreamed of. On the other hand, you certainly see in Europe a little village out here, and then you see 3 big high-rises, 10-story apartments related to the little village. And so apparently people in Europe don't have the same fear that we tend to have here of, gee, it's going to change our the life, our.
Europeans love their cars.
What's that?
I said the Europeans love their cars too.
Sure,
I mean,
of course they do.
And
Of course.
sometimes it's disappointing. I mean, but the difference, one difference is they really emphasize multimodal much better, more effectively.
Yeah,
than we do.
I get that, but at least there's a train station in every town.
Right.
Hello. And that's why I was talking about this, because unlike driving on the freeway, we rode trains in France for 3 weeks. That meant we went out across the countryside, and you're viewing a kind of a different view. And of course, they love their cars, but the addition to that statement is that they love their littler cars. So if you rent,
Their roads are a little.
it's
that's
hard
good.
to rent if you go to the rental agency in Europe, it's really hard to rent a full-size big car. Mostly they're littler cars, and clearly they love them. But anyway, Neil, Nelson, I didn't know if that was anything related to what you were thinking about as you proposed this.
Well, it seems like periodically we get resistance to sort of what seems like logical additions to subdivisions or extensions, and it's hard to figure out why people don't expect that to happen, I guess. And I thought this article might give us some insight to that, like, but maybe you can help us there.
So just for the record, whoever gets to write this down, Nils Peterson, 841 Travoy. Yeah, I think I shared that because having sat in your seat as chair and watched these processes and neighbors come out, I remember, was it Harvest Hills, the extension of 3rd Street?
Right.
That had come in multiple times, and neighbors from around were objecting to the traffic kinds of considerations. And the article is sort of building the case, well, if you let those neighbors block this, then you get this Swiss cheesy kind of development. We get holes that don't get filled in well or whatever. And I think that relative to Moscow, I mean, we'll have a little of that, but not on the scale that Sarasota, Florida does.
Right.
I would be curious as to what your broader reason for reviewing the subdivision ordinances are in terms of what are the goals. And one of the thoughts that I had is making choices that can't then be thwarted by a developer's CC&Rs. So you'll recall I split a lot, the Housing Trust, not me. Housing Trust purchased and split a lot over on Southview. I was the first buyer. When the developer offered the draft CC&Rs, I objected and I refused to buy unless I was allowed to subdivide the lot. They had a clause in there, you can't subdivide the lot, even though the city's zoning code would have allowed me to subdivide the lot. Had I not been the first buyer, those CC&Rs would have been set in stone, and that lot would have been undevelopable from my affordable housing perspective because it was too expensive for a lot. I couldn't divide it. So, and I think I've seen some CC&Rs that would prevent an ADU. So while you may be going through a process of allowing them, some developer is actively thwarting you at the same time. So my thought,
PCR.
pardon me?
What is the PCR?
CC&R,
Yeah.
covenants, something.
For a particular
And
subdivision.
restrictions.
Yeah.
They're additional burdens set on the title by the developer. And
We don't really have control over, though.
the city has no
Yeah,
control over them, but the developer can say you can't have a fence that's of chain link, you can't do this, you can't do that, you can't subdivide, you can't have an additional dwelling, you can't da-da-da-da-da-da-da.
Talk about color.
Yeah,
color of
right, you can't park your
houses,
RV more than 2 weeks out of the year in front of the house, all sorts of things which all are ostensibly to make the neighborhood more desirable. But at the same time could thwart whatever it is your goals are in reviewing and revising the zoning code.
Well, Mike can probably explain even better than I can, but really we're trying to codify alternative ways of subdividing, which right now, is mostly by zoning and lot size and street standards, but allowing different patterns such as a clustered open space configuration or a traditional neighborhood configuration that emulates more what we have in the historic parts of town. I mean, you might want to add to that, but.
Yeah, and then
That's-
just codify a lot of the things that end up as conditions, that seem to put, maybe staff and the commission against the developer or the public, like every certain distance, if there's a park in the subdivision, and you can drive to it in 2 minutes, but it takes you 20 minutes to walk to it, then there's those connections, pedestrian paths that end up cutting through blocks. And there are a lot of things, cul-de-sacs are show up quite a bit just because of our topography. But we don't want to see those in every circumstance. We think they should be prohibited except for extreme circumstances where may drop off, extreme topography, things like that. And it's just a lot of those things that, we end up working through, and it'd be so much better if they were codified, good planning practices that were codified in the code instead of, having a weak subdivision code and having to, try to put those as conditions each time there's a subdivision that goes through.
And also access points, like we were talking about earlier, specifying more of those so that you don't get so many arterial configurations.
Yeah, and just making it more
Yeah.
predictable for
Right.
everybody in the
More
process
connectivity.
for having it, instead of, surprise, there's a pedestrian pathway, there's a recommendation, things like that.
In your statement that the CCNR could intentionally block an ADU, but there's nothing that any governing body can do to change or modify the CCNR. Am I not correct? Aren't those neighborhood and developer conducive and have really nothing to do with a P&Z or a CUP or a, and so therein would lie the problem. I agree with it because I know what was issued in our development when it was put in, and you're just scratching your head saying, who came up with this? All in the interest of making the property more,
Desirable, valuable.
yeah.
Right.
And so it is an interesting dynamic. What can be done to keep from falling into a trap? Where we're trying to, eventually make some affordability issues and change some lot work and tough one.
And some of the strong towns things talk about neighborhoods that are able to continue to evolve, which we see in our more historic ones where it was some smaller houses, the houses themselves grew, a house got divided into two apartments, whereas on the far side of Mountain View, we've built the neighborhood sort of to its max. And there isn't that capacity for the neighborhood to adapt itself over time, start a little small and then grow. And I think that, again, the CCNRs could be set up to block that. I don't think that's desirable for the city. From an affordable housing standpoint, it's certainly not desirable to have the max locked in. I'm trying to figure out how to start at the min and allow people to get into a house at the lower end and then what they could do with it. I would suggest that you ponder. I sent you another article, Wendy, about the state of Oregon eliminating the single-family zone. By legislative action at the state level, they mandated to cities over 30,000 or something like that, that there would be no single-family zone anymore. And the problem is, there's a really nice New York Times graphical essay of major cities, and they've colored the single-family zones one color and everything else. And you see these huge districts that can't get any denser because they're all single-family zone. When I find myself sort of sounding like I'm at the far end of libertarian here, what if you got rid of lot size? And you allowed the developer to figure out what was a marketable lot size, or maybe you put a maximum lot size on and let the developer figure out what the minimum lot size was. And I come to that, I was recently here with, in fact, you just did the relevant criteria for a replat. We got 17 units on there by playing around with the rules as they stood. I think we might have been able to make something that was desirable that had more than 17 units on it. Had we not been bound by, you'll recall one of those lots, a single-family lot, was 5,002 square feet, and several of the townhouse lots were 1,806 square feet. We pushed them right down to as close as we could. Somewhat the geography of the site made things happen. But had there been no lot size, I might have said, well, let's think urban. I mean, sometimes you see some pretty narrow houses in urban areas. Could we have gotten a 14-foot house, made a couple of lots that were super skinny? But obviously, the set of rules that we were working with didn't allow that conversation to happen. But there's obviously some minimum where I would have said, well, that's ridiculous. I don't think I could sell that. I'm not going to make a lot that I don't think I could build a
Well,
house on. So.
tangential to that, I mean, we are working on an open space subdivision alternative, and Rand Laurent would come, who's kind of the godfather of open space and cluster subdivisions, would come in and say, well, that lots are the last thing you do. And, you know, I think I gave a presentation to this group a couple months ago on that, where you look at what areas need to be preserved if you're doing a 40-acre subdivision, say. You look at the areas that really are primary conservation areas, and then secondary that would be desirable for community use. And then define by streets where the streets should go to start to enclose those. And then the lots are the last thing to happen, and the size isn't that important because you have this shared space. So I could see in that case that might be a marketable idea, because density, I guess I'm always a believer that density for density's sake isn't easy to sell, that you need to have amenities with density. And you look at something like Vancouver, BC, well, it's got all this water, and public shoreline available, so they can have tower after tower after tower and pack people in at a high density because they have, that sort of light and air and amenity. So that's, I don't know. I mean, you're throwing out an interesting question about lot size really being the sort of beginning point, I think, in the way subdivisions are. And,
the way they're done now.
Yeah,
right.
the way they're done now, so inverting that and seeing where you end up, but so that you can have housing choices.
Right. Though I suppose to recognize that most developers are not like the housing trust. They're going to carve up the land and sell it and be done. Where I start by saying, I'm going to do that, I'm going to divide up the land, and then I'm going to design the houses, and then I'm going to take it all the way from bare land to occupied home. I can have the second dialogue. What's the house that would fit on the lot? How could that work with the space around it? And like I talked about, you weren't here, but the alley and how to make value out of the alley space as an amenity to this little neighborhood. If you weren't thinking you were staying in the game all the way to the end, you would have a different, perhaps, perspective on it.
Yeah, I think that would be significantly different, too. You would not have a vested interest in doing the best job possible here for people. You would just be making the buck.
No change from today.
Well, I'm not.
Well, I guess if you thought you could sell more smaller lots on the same square footage, but then we could make the argument, well, the narrower the lot, I've made this argument to you in the past, the narrower the lot, the higher the tax revenue per linear foot, the easier it is to support the infrastructure, so it's a boon to the city.
Well, I mean, an example that would come closest to what we've seen in the last few years would be the 3rd Street extension across Mountain View, where there was resistance in the established neighborhood with larger lots and larger homes at having smaller lots, which made total sense because it would be hard to sell a large lot down in the hollow, in a sense. So it made complete sense, and now it's being developed with But there was a lot of neighborhood, you were leading that.
I was on
yeah,
P and Z
yeah.
at the time. There was a lot of
Yeah,
neighborhood
and
resistance.
I think
yeah.
I had been on a year or two, and yeah, and I remember.
And then I've subsequently looked at, somebody's developing the south side of the street. At the north side, there were 6 lots came on the market as a block, so buy all 6. And I looked at it, I said, I could turn those into 9. In other words, come in and replat it because they were made wider than was necessary for a twin home or a townhouse. And so, I mean, and I weighed that option. Then I got a better parcel, I think, for what I'm doing. But weighed the option of trying to make it even narrower lots.
So the big question is, how do you overcome public resistance?
Well, you also have a matter of choice. Not everybody wants to live in a tiny lot, nor should they live in a giant field. But you have a very specific vision, and a lot of people here talk about it as well, in having, the density and really packing it in. But that's not what everyone wants. I wouldn't just turn it loose so that that's all we got. Can I bring up the Board of Adjustment one that we just had? Is that okay to bring that up?
Yeah, the decision's made, so sure.
Okay, so like, we had a variance come through the Board of Adjustment that I sat in here for, since it happened to be across the street. And it's a narrow lot that's 20 feet, and he wanted to build a 16-foot wide house, and because of the setbacks, he needed a variance, which he got. And, but to make it to be the 3-foot minimum, he would have been at a 14-foot wide house, and he says that's going to be smaller than a single wide trailer, and I won't build a home there. I won't build a home that way. Which was really interesting to me that Joe did the calculations to what the inside dimensions were, because I had no clue on that. So you get into some really narrow lots, and you just turn it loose without any kind of consideration for the whole, I don't know how to phrase it, for the whole picture, then you're, I don't know what you're going to wind up with. I mean, I have to understand that the 20-foot lot was pretty limiting, and to go to with a 3-foot minimum setbacks, you would have had a 14-foot wide house, and it was too small, and I could see that. If it's going to be
And so
smaller.
the variance was to
So
relieve the
you should have a 5-foot setback on each side, but on a
And you
20-foot
went to 3.
lot, you wouldn't have any house if you did that, and so it's usually 3 to 3. And he wanted a variance where you could have 3 on one side and 1 on the other. And the decision was that you needed the 4 feet. You can split it, and you have to have a 1-foot minimum on each side. But if you want 2 and 2, or 1.5 and 2.5, or whatever, so that he could get that house situated on there.
And then I start to say, what's the point of that? Why not just build row houses that have attached walls?
Yeah, I mean,
Because then you're not
yes.
wasting this
Yeah.
little
Sliver,
useless
the
trash
sliver,
chute, you know.
Well, he just was dealing with one lot.
He's had
Yeah.
It was
lots
just,
of-
it was just one 20-foot wide, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, ideally, if you had a number of those in a row, that's what you do, but they were just stuck with, in those older areas, they platted 20-foot wide lots by 125 feet deep, and then you just picked up however many it took to build whatever you wanted to build. It just so happened that somebody had built something on there that was exactly 20 feet wide and was already actually encroaching on the park property after a survey was done. So that's why the issue. But then you start to deal with building codes. You can't build closer than 3 feet from the property line without.
Fires on the,
Yeah,
fire.
you have 1 hour firewalls, and then you have a limited number of penetrations, so you're limited to the windows and doors that you can have on those sides. And
It gets
so
pretty
it really
oppressive.
starts to, box you in as far as the closer you get to the property lines.
I know Coeur d'Alene, because I got called in as a consultant, this was a while ago, because Coeur d'Alene has the problem that they're right up against, they have no area to expand. They have the lake, they have Hayden, they have Post Falls, they're just boxed in. And so they've decided density is the way to go in various ways. And they, at the time, and this was, probably 8 years ago now, they were looking at what do we do, how do we start to work with smaller infill parcels, you know, like you're talking about, and have, because there isn't any expanse of land left to do, to meet the current setback requirements, and how do we, you know, work with those infill lots? Or, obviously, they've also gone vertical, but anyway, it's an interesting problem, but,
Yeah.
yeah. Joel?
I'm sitting here contemplating, wondering what, for Nels's development, if it had been a development where he was developing the land and the lots, but then putting the land on the market. I'm curious exactly how a 1,800 square foot lot would sell on the market. It's possible that the tiny house movement has reached a point where somebody would buy it for that purpose, but I'm curious. Yeah.
Well, there are millions of row houses in America that are built on basically either 18 or 2,000 square foot lots. And so we know they can happen. We just happen to be in a world where we think a 5-foot setback, God wrote 5-foot setback, that's gonna be what we believe. And
Well, when you start to separate houses, it makes sense to me.
Sure.
Because you want light.
Right.
And you want air coming in.
Absolutely.
But if you go below that, to me, it makes no sense to have things that are attached, or aren't attached.
Aren't attached,
You know, it's, other than you have, every once in a while, you have to have a 2-hour wall between units as you go down the road, but.
Yeah, and then if they're
And-
not attached, then you start to deal with, well, if somebody's allowed to go right up to the property line with a wall, then how are they gonna maintain that side of the wall without
Yeah.
trespassing on somebody else's property?
Yeah.
So, you know, I mean, it
Yeah.
kinda all factors together.
Well, we do have townhouses and twin homes. We are doing that. And so there are those options out there.
Well, and anything, I mean, like the
more
subdivision
of
code,
them.
working on the cluster and traditional
Right.
types. But anything beyond that, you would just go through a plan unit development in order to propose that. So if you wanted to propose those smaller lot sizes, I mean, it would just, you know, it wouldn't be allowed by right, you'd just have to go through the PUD in conjunction with a subdivision plat in order to be able to achieve that, which,
Which brings us back to the first article, because now it's not by right, so you've invited the neighbors in to object, to thwart that process. I mean, it might still be doable, but
yeah.
it
It will still be doable.
You know, it's interesting because we've made a lot of trips over to Western Washington, and more you see co-housing communities, and they accommodate all kinds of, I mean, it's almost like a cluster open space subdivision, because you just own your house, and then everything else is common space and has designated uses, but as a result, there's sort of a lot of variation in square footage in the houses that are within it, and it's not because the whole thing is cohesive in terms of where the open spaces are and where the common paths are and parking areas. You don't notice that this house might be, a 600 square foot house, and that one might be a 2,000 square foot house. They all seem to. But they're pretty close together. In fact, a lot of them are attached, so, anyway. But I don't know what the underlying covenant is that allows them to do that, that maybe it is a PUD mechanism. It would be, I'll see if I can find something out on that, but,
Well, as they get there and as they are welcomed and people see that they work well, you will have less resistance. I think the most interesting thing in the article you gave us was the last sentence where he said, I think we need to be talking about interests and incentives, not appealing to a sense of altruism or shared civic destiny to get the job done. So people will believe in affordable housing, but they also want their private property. And so you have to, they're not going to just throw away what they want because it's good for someone else. They need to have a shared interest, and they need to have incentives that make it a good sell for them to support. And part of it is getting some of these out there and seeing that they work. And anyway.
Well, I think a lot of it comes down to, I think the article mentioned that, you know, if you have Home Depot built across town, you're going to support that because you want to go to Home Depot. But if Home Depot is built right next to you, then you're not necessarily going to support it. And I remember Deb Reynolds, when she was on the commission, you know, we talked about density, and she lives in an R4 zone, and I think it's split on Logan Street there. There's R3 across the street, but you know, she made a comment that you think you believe in something until it happens next to you. And I think that's the perfect example of this property, that these people live in a neighborhood that what they're proposing is just like them, but it's going to be more traffic. There's no incentive for them because
Right.
they get no benefit over it except for additional traffic on the street.
Exactly. Yeah.
They're not getting Costco 2 miles away that they can, you know, go to. There's no benefit to them, and that's why they oppose it, you know.
Well, and I live in an R4 that's close to the university, and every time an apartment building goes in, there's more parking problems, there's more street traffic, you know. And they're not getting any benefit from that. And to say, well, infrastructure's less, that's a hard sell to someone who has a home there in a quiet neighborhood or a decent neighborhood that all of a sudden is overrun. And, you know, so it's, what's in it for them? There has to be something more than it's a good thing to do.
Well, let's transition over to density without zoning, because that presents kind of an interesting way of looking at density, not through you know, quantitatively, but instead it's enabled by transportation decisions. And I was hoping Mike Kite would come tonight, but he didn't make it. I sent the article to him, and he was thinking about coming. But anyway, that was one that I stumbled on, that just regulating the speed of, that people are willing to travel X distance, whether it's walking or riding a bike or driving a car to meet their daily needs and go to work, et cetera. And usually they like to live outside of what they call Zone B, I guess, and live in Zone A, and then it would be like, I just as a idea, living in Fort Russell and walking downtown. I mean, you know, that's a walkable distance, but you don't have bars and everything in your residential neighborhood. In a sense, the article goes towards, well, you know, one person's zone, like you're talking about, one person's zone, they live in Zone B, their Zone A may be somebody else's Zone B, so it's, you know, there's this, so really using transportation decisions to kind of prevent, you know, I mean, I guess I would use also as an example that we haven't, as a community, in my opinion, and this goes back 30 years, done a great job of figuring out how not to make all of the traditional neighborhoods a place you pass through if you're in a new neighborhood to get to the west side of town. So as the east continues to grow, or the north, or whatever, and people drive farther and farther to get in, they're just using those neighborhoods as a way to get through to wherever they're going. And the article kind of touches on that, you know, we have those transportation decisions make a big difference in how land use happens, in a sense. And so if we were to up the speed on 3rd Street for Nels' sake to say 40, just think what that would do for you, Nels. And just think what it would do for development, too. I mean, it's, you know, and it's, because people could reach, but if it was limited to 20 miles an hour, or do what Seattle does with traffic calming all over the place, then people start to realize, well, maybe I better live a little closer to where I work. And that by itself sort of starts to restrict sprawl and extension of infrastructure, et cetera. So, but anyway, those are some of the things I got out of it, but anybody else read it? Anybody have any comments?
I missed that one. I'm so
Okay.
sorry, because I
No,
was
it's
trying to
okay.
catch them.
Well, read it because I think, I think Mike and I talked about it because.
What you're saying is making sense.
Mike and I talked about it because it's really looking through a different lens at zoning. It's looking instead of, well, maybe you don't need zoning if you're using transportation as the key to how land use occurs. I don't know, so.
And one of the sticky things for us is that we're just still a village, and we know we're smart, and we've been to Seattle, and we know what a city is, and we know that there's jobs in Seattle that pay six figures, but we don't have them here in Moscow, and so it's always confusing for us to be here and try to figure out how a village should be versus how a city.
And Moscow, if you go and look at the
Should be.
density per square mile, I forget, but it's pretty high for a
Yeah,
town,
I think we have more
it's
apartments.
higher than Boise.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
And,
Oh,
for
absolutely.
example.
No.
Yeah.
And actually, it was higher just a few years ago. Once we added some of the property out here that we're gonna, out toward Palouse, we've softened the figure a little bit.
Yeah, I haven't looked at it in a
And
few
so
years.
it was up around 5,000 people per square mile at a point, while Boise is
3,000.
pitifully below 3,000, more like 2,500. And so Boise isn't a good example for us. They've really gone the California way as opposed to maybe a Seattle way. But that's an issue I think that we all deal with, because we're a little bit too smart for the size of our town in a way. And so we know things, and we have a university, and we think we're really cool, and we have some restaurants downtown. But on the other hand, we're still small.
We are still small. We are not Seattle. So
Which
there are
is,
lessons we can take from it, but that doesn't
According
mean
to
we're
my
going to
wife,
be
is a
Seattle.
perfect deal.
Well, I think there's a number of factors that have contributed to that, whether on purpose or not. I mean, you talk about urban growth boundaries here, and urban growth boundaries are illegal in Idaho. We can't have an urban growth boundary in Idaho. The state legislature
Really? Yeah.
legislature hasn't given us that power. But essentially, we have the same thing
Area
with the
city.
farm fields, right?
Right.
I mean, we have all this agricultural fields, and we have 3, 4, 5 major property owners that still farm those fields and don't, develop them slowly and incrementally. And, I mean, a lot of that serves as more of an urban growth boundary
Right.
to a certain extent.
Yeah, it does,
And
that's true.
you know.
It actually
And we have the
actually
state
does.
boundary on the west, we've got the university taking up, major portion of the southwest, the north. I mean, in a certain sense, that's
That
why we
causes it,
haven't
yeah.
sprawled, was
Sure.
because of these kind of factors that we've had.
Yeah, 3 families in the university make us into a urban growth boundary.
Essentially,
It's a
yeah.
really cool thing. That's worth a paper. You can present that at a planning conference.
Well, I'll just pipe into that. I think there was some conference I went to where they were saying, it's important to think about what is unique about your city and not be so quick to try to be like some other city.
Right, right.
Because then you're going to lose what you have. So I think that's always a constant battle between wanting the high-paying jobs and wanting the development but at what point do you lose what you do have that's unique? And that I've met a lot of people recently who have retired and left Seattle to come here because of what Moscow is. So I think there's that, you have to be careful too about not being so quick to jump ship and try to emulate something else and lose what we are.
No, I would certainly agree with that, though. In my view, having been here roughly 60 years on and off, our town is, I came in 57, it was pitiful. There were two places to eat, Johnny's and the hotel. And, good food in Moscow you couldn't get. And today we're blessed with this whole crowd of young people who seem to want to provide wonderful food for us. So yeah, you're right. I think the lifestyle in Moscow today is significantly better than it was 50 years ago when I was
Even
a student.
25 years ago, yeah.
Well,
Even
yeah, you can grow and you can increase your density and still preserve and improve what you have without.
Right.
No, I think it's a very good comment, Brandy. I agree with that. I just, as you try and figure out how we should grow, and, if the university gets, if the University of Idaho could ever get back on track and be growing slightly more than our town's growing rather than sort of receding, it would give us some dialogue. Pullman has got the big growth factor with the university, and yet they don't have the attitude about the town is missing in lots of ways. So we have an attitude about our town that occurs to me as more positive, even though they have the fancy growth and higher paying jobs. So I think your comment is really well taken.
So I think one of the things that's an incentive are small parks that we have developments include a pocket park to that development. And boy, I can't go back several months or remember very well, but you were at a meeting or a presentation, Nils, at the admin building on green spaces in Europe or something like that. You gave me a ride home, so you were there. But it was back in February or something, and they had the good mobility systems in the town, and there was a pier that was contaminated that they turned back into a public swimming area, and they had high rises, but they had tons of green space out front so you could enjoy it. And I remember saying to you, if I could live someplace like that, and they had the recycling just really set out well all through town, if I could live in a place like that, I'd be proud, and I'd be happy to live with that kind of density, because I had the amenities that make me happy and make me feel like I'm being a good planetary citizen, So that comes back to what the article said, is interest and incentives and what we can do to make that work.
Well, I think transportation is key to that, because
Transportation is key.
density is a lot easier to accept when you can get around by means other than driving a car and finding a place to park and getting caught in traffic. It's really having, and so this article really pushes towards controlling the amount of accessible land by the speed limits, basically that, you can really start to get a more compact community that then does support public transportation, does support biking, being able to bike. I ran over the pedestrian bridge today to try to do my little loop and realized that it's kind of getting out of my walking range, but it's in my running range still for another year or two maybe. But anyway, but being able to, by having that multimodal approach and that really automatically kind of limits the amount of accessible land, and it's a more effective sort of growth management tool than maybe zoning is, or, I don't know. Anyway, I thought it was a pretty interesting take, and I would have loved to have heard what a transportation engineer had to say about it, but I'll have to sit down with Michael and talk to him about it, I guess.
The green spaces in Europe thing, and then a lot of magazine articles in cities where they've reclaimed rail areas as linear parkways.
Right.
You can make a place beautiful and wonderful and attractive, and people want to be there, and they're living in density, but they've got the blue sky and the flowers and the pollinators and bikes and, the whole ball of wax,
So, and connecting people to what they call those productive places people want to be, rather than moving them through it as fast as possible to get somewhere else, So anyway. All right, well, and this guy promises more articles on zoning, so I'll see what else he comes up with. Any other comments, or we are all done for the night? Okay, adjourned.
Thank you.
Transport, sorry about that. Gosh, it used to be at the beginning of the agenda. Yeah, so, sorry about that. Joel, do you have anything to report?
The Transportation Commission meets tomorrow in this room from 4 to 6. The last meeting was, I believe, July 11th. Major topic of discussion was the alternatives for the ending of the westbound bicycle lane on 3rd Street.
Yeah.
The staff proposal has been to have it end and there be some modifications to northbound, is that Washington?
Yes.
Yeah, northbound Washington, and some facilities to allow bicycles to get into safe places there.
So going north, one block, and then turning onto Second Street, maybe?
Well, the proposal that the end be at Washington with some modifications to traffic flow has at this point been vetoed twice by Washington or Idaho Department of Transportation. Staff seemed interested in making another go of it.
So how does IDOT propose people getting across Washington? How does the Idaho Department of Transportation propose people on bicycles getting across Washington?
That they negotiate the intersection approximately as it is. The members of the commission were less than enthusiastic about recommending another go of it. Department of Transportation has said no twice, and we couldn't see any indication that they're about to change their mind. So we ended up making no recommendation.
Okay. Well, thank you for
Any further comments?
Sure, I would, my understanding is that because of ITD saying, no, we're not interested in including this northbound part of our highway, now the Transportation Commission has been deciding, okay, is our recommendation to terminate the protected bike lane at Washington or at Jefferson? And they had ALTA, which was the group that evaluated the 3rd Street corridor initially, the different options. There were the A, B, and C options for that treatment there. They had them look at those two options, and ALTA came back and said they recommend terminating at Jefferson, but my understanding is the Transportation Commission is still interested in continuing to Washington in that, so that's kind of, they're not ready to make that recommendation. Does that sound about right, Joel?
I think I didn't follow you, so, right now, I mean, yeah, the problem is getting across the couplet from east to west. And what you just said,
They're not ready to make a recommendation for Jefferson yet.
It's really the question is where, if this two-way protected bike lane goes in, where does the two-way protected bike lane terminate?
so then you just
And
have
then you return to either
west.
sharrows or bike lanes or some
Oh,
other kind
I
of
see,
treatment
okay.
to be determined. But where does the protected bike lane
Right, right,
terminate?
Most of the traffic northbound on Washington, in either, most of them sort of filter over to the west lane and make a left turn. There are a few who proceed on, but in the next block, they merge into a single lane. And I guess the question is, why couldn't there be a designated turn lane and designated through lanes, which would make handling the bicycles easier? But Department of Transportation doesn't like that.
I think wherever, at some point, the two-way protected bike lane ends. And then if you're on a bike, you continue on some other treatment. So
Right,
it's
right.
just the question of where is that
Right, yeah,
going to
gotcha,
end?
yeah. Because they're still presuming that people are going to continue on westward if they need to go westward and pick up the
Right,
trail
as
at
they
some
are
point.
now. And so
Yeah.
the two-way protected bike lane can't continue through the intersection. and
Right, right.
So
The
where does that?
area beyond a potential left turn lane could be a refuge area for bicycles.
Right.
The meeting tomorrow, I've been lax, I haven't seen the agenda.
So, okay. Well, thank you for the update, Joel, and I'm sorry I preempted you by trying to adjourn the meeting without including you. It used to, for years, it was at the front end of the agenda.
In a sense, town is the end of, that's where a bicycle's going, to town. It's either going to town or away from town. And it reminds me of, I lived for years in Germany, and one of the cities in Germany was rather distinct, Munich being the city. A freeway went blasting toward, 5 freeways went blasting toward Munich, and then they just stopped. And Munich refused, as a city, to let a freeway go through the city. So it just, you had 4 lanes blasting, and then all of a sudden, boom, it's over. And now you're just lost in the city. And I don't know how it is now.
It's
but
just like that, because I was just there.
and so
It's still like that.
it didn't, unlike our lovely cities, Spokane or Seattle or whatever, that makes sure that the freeway gets to blast right through. And so for me, on my bike, I'm now back into biking now that warm weather is here. And for people kind of in the south sector, the bike path works really good. The problem is you just have to stop at the highway and wait for something to happen.
Just thinking about commuting to campus.
Right.
I would get intimidated once I got down to the base of Third. How do you get to campus from
Right.
there? It's
No,
just
I
like,
understand.
so when they used to allow us to ride bicycles on the sidewalk on Main Street at a slow rate of speed, I would do that. But it would take me 15 minutes longer, but I walked because I'm less afraid to walk through all that than to ride a bike through it. Door to door, it was 10 minutes on bike and 26 minutes on foot. But so I think it's a real problem that isn't really being addressed, it sounds like. How we get through, because most people are trying to get either to campus or to the bike path to go on to Pullman or wherever they go, or the shopping mall, or I guess downtown, even downtown. I mean,
Yeah, it's
So-
just all about how it terminates.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we envisioned that it would
Yeah.
terminate on Washington Street, but if you're heading northbound on Washington and you're turning left on Third, there's that lane that keeps on heading, north and then ends up tapering into the other lane, which
Yeah.
nobody really uses, because if you're in that left lane, you're turning
You're
left
stuck.
typically.
Yeah.
You're not going straight and waiting in the
Right.
line. So we were trying to get ITD to eliminate that and use that as the bicycle refuge area. for when it
what
comes
about
across.
jogging around City Hall and going across the couplet at Second?
Do you mean with the protected bike lane?
Well,
Because
no.
that's the protected bike lane, the whole
Right,
plan that
right.
Transportation Commission
There's a
chose
solution.
and adopted and recommended was just on Third Street.
Yeah,
And the only
yeah.
question, and it's not, none of the options get you all the way to Main Street.
Right,
It
right.
doesn't, or to campus. I mean, it's kind of maybe the first piece of something.
Well, I'm just
Depending
thinking
how it
of
goes,
at
maybe
least
there's
the
more, but-
continuing westward movement, so maybe I'm talking single lane, but at least getting around to being able to get,
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, people are going to have to either, continue in some other, outside of the protected bike lane, regardless of which direction
Right.
they're going, and,
yeah,
um,
so it'll be interesting. Okay. Yeah, is that it?
I'm done.
Okay, thank you. I guess, barring any other, are there any announcements?
Yeah, I have an
Okay,
announcement.
sorry. Yeah.
It's about the citizen survey.
Oh.
So we've got.
Oh, yeah, thank you. for
Citizen
remi-
survey questions.
Right,
I think we're given 2 to 3, and we have a deadline, I think, in the middle of September.
we do, so we only
to get-
have 2 more meetings, really.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for, and the last time, remind me, it was not about, what did we use for our last questions? It was, it was, yeah, tiny home. Was it tiny homes?
Underpass under the creek on one question. I've been using it now just the last few days, and it's really, it's very, a lot of fun. And now I don't have to stop at the highway and wait for a light. I just go up and go.
Well,
So that's cool.
my balance.
So this was just a quick synopsis. We conduct these every 2 years, or we used to, starting in 2002, serving as a benchmark for community perceptions and evaluating municipal services. So it's sent out to 1,200 random sampled, statistically valid. Commission questions started with 4 and is now limited to 2. I think that's bumped back up to 3 since we separated them. So in 2016, it was restructured, do an annual survey. We've got the city questions in the even years, and then we've got the commission questions in the odd years. And so we're in an odd year. This last year, we ended up, or in 2017, the questions we asked were pertaining to tiny homes, as far as support tiny homes as a method for providing affordable housing options. These were the results, so quite a bit of support for doing that. The second question was support amending the city code to allow higher density and less off-street parking requirements for tiny homes. So that was kind of seen as the bigger impediments to tiny homes at the time, was the parking requirements and then just the large, the typical lot sizes. And so a little less support for that, even though there was, a little less than 50, probably around 57, 58% of people supported that, and around 35% did not. So still some support for that. And then this was a question that
that was the one I was trying to
administration
first.
ended up inserting into the citizen survey, but putting it under planning and zoning, even though we didn't come up with it. It was just pertaining to, the ordinance that the council passed, last Monday? No, it was,
well, yeah.
it was,
Yeah, it was
I guess
last
this last
week.
Monday,
Yeah.
so.
Interesting.
And so, yeah, I mean, I guess this was 2 years in the works from when we, had
Right.
this question. And then the council, of course, had a more robust survey that they had sent out to garner more, more opinion, just because this was a little hard to comprehend exactly what, people's perceptions were on there. So that was that question. And then I can either go through them or I can send out kind of the responses. So ever since we started this in about 2004, we've got the questions every couple years to give you an idea of what we had asked previously or what previous commissions had asked. And I can email those out to get you thinking, or it's up to you guys. We can go through them.
How many are you going through?
Well,
I want to see the list.
I mean, there's not that many, so we've got a few. So started in about 2004, we had please rate the following statement, allowing small retail or office businesses such as physicians, accountants, engineers, business consultants, and beauty salons in residential neighborhood is a benefit to the community. So it looked like
It's pretty spread
quite a
across.
bit, yeah,
Yeah.
not a whole lot of support. Well, I mean, it's kind of, it's kind of split, looks like.
Yeah, I would agree.
And then we just had, please identify the importance of the following neighborhood characteristics to you. Then we went through the list, proximity to school, really important. Proximity to work, important, I guess somewhat less important. Shopping, not as important. Park or recreation facility, pretty important. Proximity to downtown, I guess somewhere in the middle. Single-family housing neighborhood, there you go. Very important at the time. Duplex housing neighborhood, less important. Apartment housing, same, you can probably, expect these answers.
I wonder if they'd be the same today.
I know, yeah, I think that.
So maybe
it'd
that's
be-
worth a question right there. Let's just see what,
Could be,
take the
yeah.
pulse,
I mean, that was kind of the first thing that struck me was, I think they would be different today in that
So
question.
we're presuming that they would be different, maybe we should find out if they would be
I mean, it may, yeah, I mean, this was 2004, it'd be interesting to see
15 years.
15 years,
Yeah.
how the perceptions have changed. I mean, I think that'd probably be and maybe we can think of some more,
Yeah, we
that
might-
we can ask in
You
here.
might want to tweak this like.
Maybe not a little
bike
bit,
pass.
but.
Yeah, I mean, I would want to ask not to be difficult, but what was done with that information and what would you do with it if it came again? I mean, there's a lot of things on there,
Yeah.
I mean,
That's true. Yeah.
so if, like, I'm thinking about the conversation about density, if that's really what you want to know moving forward, you've been talking about the cluster developments and all these density issues, if that's something you foresee yourselves working on, then maybe just getting directly to, some question about your support for increased density and the things that might, maybe positives or negatives about it, this is just so much information, I don't know how you would,
Yeah, that's
what you would
true.
do with
So
it.
Yeah, so maybe if you were willing to accept higher density development, which amenities would be important?
Yeah,
As-
there you go.
as
Yeah,
one
something-
example,
Something
yeah.
like that could maybe help
Yeah.
to guide where you go over the next couple of years, I don't know, but.
Yeah, like, I mean, some of these, I don't know that, Fort Russell Historic Housing District, I don't know that that'd be any valuable information.
Right.
Cul-de-sac or
Yeah,
dead-end
I'd take that
streets,
one
pretty,
off.
really specific on some of these, and I
Yeah.
think that, we could rework it and, yeah, maybe ask some of the questions about, those important amenities or, options of cluster housing, kind of get a sense of that as well.
So how do we want to proceed?
You see through with what you wanted to do? This
Yeah.
is just 2004.
No, I mean, as far as if we have 2 more meetings essentially before
When do
we
you
have to figure this out.
the thing?
Middle of September.
When do you need to have
The middle of September,
middle of
So
September?
maybe we have 3 more meetings
yeah.
before.
That always goes so fast.
It does.
And it's like, oh, here we go. We're on the line.
Well, that's why I brought it up, so.
Yeah,
no,
we
I'm
can
glad
start-
you
we
did.
start
Thank
talking
you.
about it,
Yeah,
but,
that's great.
I mean, we can, if you think that this question is worth revisiting and maybe reworking, maybe we could work to revise it and then bring it back next meeting and take a
How
look at it.
fast can we go through these so that maybe we could pick out 6 to work on?
The other years, you mean, to
Well,
see what
whatever
other
it is you want to
questions-
go ahead and show us, Mike, but
Oh, the other ones? Well, yeah, let's just go through here. 2008, issues questioned by P and Z included measuring respondents' feelings in regard to water conservation requirements in new development. So it was idea of requiring water conservation techniques in all new development. 68% said they strongly agree with the idea. When asked if they support allowing gated communities, 58% disagreed or strongly disagreed. 22% strongly agree they'd support that type of community. Then on the topic of allowing the development of mixed residential uses in new developments within a single zoning district, the presence of a mixture of residential uses within a single neighborhood make the neighborhood less desirable to 55% of respondents and more desirable to 25%. The limited commercial uses, I mean, this is almost similar to 2004 in that question as far as the mixture of uses. Of the limited commercial uses suggested for mixed use in residential development, groceries and eating and drinking establishments scored highest at 41% as a type of mixed use that would be favored. Daycare facilities, medical offices both scored 30%. Personal services, professional services, convenience stores rated 23, 24, 25. And 8% noted other types of development that would be favored, and they have the list. 2010, please rate the following statements by checking the box that most closely represents your opinion. I would be interested in high-quality, high-density residential living opportunity, so examples of apartment, loft, condominium near downtown, the University of Idaho campus. Probably had more people, neutral to the disagree category there. The presence of a mixture of residential uses, single-family homes, townhomes, duplexes within a single neighborhood that includes common open spaces as buffers to provide separation between those uses would make a neighborhood more desirable to me. Actually, a little bit, fairly high there. There's quite a few neutral, but you had close to 50% as far as supporting that. And then please check the 3 most important planning items below that you feel should be addressed in planning for future growth in the community. Looks like we had economic development, traffic management and congestion, and water resource planning as the top 3. City of Moscow is considering a greater allowance of limited commercial uses within new residential development. What commercial uses would be desirable to you to have close proximity to your residence? Eating and drinking establishments is probably what you would expect.
And groceries.
Groceries is the close second. In 2012, this is just our question about ADUs. So these are kind of what we had just gone over.
Yeah.
And then 2014, please rate the following statements by checking the box that most closely represents your opinion. City of Moscow should consider the issue of climate change as it plans for the future. Had quite a bit of, so that's neutral, and then you had about 50% in support of that, only about 22% opposed to it. And then compare the 2 neighborhood characteristics provided, and for option, check the one that is more important to you. So a neighborhood that includes a mix of housing types, stores, businesses that are easy to walk to, or a neighborhood with primarily single-family houses only, and you have to drive to stores and other businesses. So, I mean, almost, obviously this is higher, but, fairly close. Houses with smaller yards, and you would have to short commute to work. Easy to walk to school, stores, or restaurants, or houses with larger yards, and you would have to longer commute to work and you have a drive to get to parks, playgrounds, recreation areas. About the same as the first question. Houses with small yards and where it is easy to walk to schools, stores, and restaurants, or own or rent a detached single-family house and have to drive to shops and restaurants and have a longer commute to work. 49% compared to 43%. And then own or rent an attached single-family home where you share one or more common walls, townhouse or condominium, where it is easy to walk to shops, restaurants, or have a shorter commute. Or own or rent a detached single-family house where you have to drive to shops and restaurants, have a longer commute to work. 32% compared to 60%. And then the last one is a neighborhood with well-connected sidewalks, bicycle facilities such as bike lanes, separated pathways, or a neighborhood without well-connected sidewalks. So obviously, everybody supports a neighborhood with well-connected sidewalks and bicycle facilities. I think this represents that if you're owning a single-family home and you're driving, you're only driving 5 minutes probably across town. I mean,
Yeah, I
it's
was
not
just gonna
like you're somewhere else in a larger city where it takes you 45 minutes to do that. It's just a convenience that we still have here just because it's so, small. And that was it. The last one we had was 2017, since we skipped the 2016 when we restructured it. So that would be it.
Oh, okay.
Well, there's a couple that are outdated, so.
So topically, maybe something about density and something about proximities, proximity preferences.
Hey, could you go ahead and email those too?
Sure,
Right?
sure.
For me at least?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that'd
for
be
all
great
of
for
us.
all of us,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, Victoria, I was thinking maybe you want to share how the SEC is handling this issue. What are our questions going to be? Because I know they sent that email out.
Yeah, I'm trying
Seems
to
to be-
think, what is it you want me to say now? I remember I
I mean, so-
responded and you responded
Yeah,
and I
but-
liked your response and Russ responded and I liked his, except it was really long.
I just mean that he said, okay, here were our questions, shared it with the whole commission. Think about what questions and we'll discuss it. And, just kind of a little opportunity for each of you to email Mike with some ideas, having a little more time to absorb this, look at the past ones, think about the things, and then when, those next couple meetings, you've already had some ideas that you've all seen of each other's. That seems to be kind of
That's a good idea.
evolving on the emails with SEC before their meeting, so.
Okay,
And I was thinking too, of the density thing, I mean, just thinking about all the conversations about minimum lot size and transportation and parking, because I know you've all been hearing about the parking things with some of the more recent dense developments. I mean, it could be a way to kind of say, density is a way to, can be a way to address, increase the supply of more affordable housing options in our community. When considering density, how important are the following factors to you? Parking, transportation, minimum lot size requirements, so you can get that so much, maybe, information about, okay, people are in support of it, but they think the parking problems need to be addressed, and they don't care about the lot size. Who knows, But I just think a lot of the things that I heard you all talk about tonight could possibly be those little bullets, but that are all under that idea of density as being a way to provide more options of the types of housing we have instead of just the single family on a big lot. And it addresses really potentially that affordable housing and challenge. I feel like I'm talking quite a bit
no,
for
that's
being the
fine.
liaison, so.
Well, there are several of these that overlap,
Sure.
Yeah, I think if we modified this, we can get a lot of information. If we clean that up and ask the questions we want.
because some of the latter year questions would come back to this. And so we get rid of some of this because it's outdated, we don't need to know it, and bring in some of those other characteristics and try not to get it so dense that nobody wants to
I don't
answer
think
it.
there's any, excuse me, I'm sorry.
Sorry, go.
Go ahead.
I don't think there's any reason for not using the same questions over. who reads this thing? Come on. I've never seen one in my whole life. Never comes to my house. So,
1,200 people.
huh?
1,200 households. See.
Right. I'm waiting for somebody to ask
I
me
think
what
we
I
need to
thought.
tie it to something we want to find out for policy. I mean,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
and so if we're, you know, so what direction are we heading in that regard? What issues do we want more information about? That's how it, at least with the Historic Preservation Commission, that's
Yeah.
been how we've
Sure.
structured the questions. And this one, to me, seems a little too much. I mean, I'm not sure what I get out of it exactly.
Yeah, I would agree. It needs to be a little more directed, but I'm just saying that a question that was asked 6 years ago may get a different response
Right?
6 years
Oh,
later.
yeah,
Well, it'd just be
Oh.
interesting over the 15 years to see what's changed as far as people's perceptions or just their, you know, whether or not they're willing to accept different types of housing in their neighborhood.
Well, there's nothing on there, for example, access to public transportation, access to alternative means of, multiple means of either walkability could be one of those things. I mean, there are a lot of characteristics that I think need to be in there that aren't, like, is walkability important, is being able to park important? I don't know, I mean, you know, is a bike connected by a bike?
Yeah, those are
system?
things that you may be making decisions about, pathways and connections and,
Right,
you know.
Well, and there are some very definite density components to this question, how it was done in 2004.
right,
I
right,
mean,
right,
you-
absolutely.
there is a lot of information that can be
Yeah.
gleaned for a comparative.
Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like Scott's thought process of cleaning it up, getting rid of the redundancies, the ones that are not apropos, and maybe expanding on the questions that we do truly want a new answer on.
Right. Okay, everybody has an assignment. Mike's gonna send this
I'll
out.
send it
Everybody
out.
take a look and figure out, that'll be our shared reading and continuing ed assignment, is to start working on this.
Okay, yeah, I'll send it out, and then if everybody starts looking at it and formulating your own, and then we can get together and
Yeah.
next meeting and go over those and see if we can come up with a couple.
Good.
And while we're on density and parking, I talked to Chuck Bond,
Mm-hmm.
and he said they did put up a
There's a
fence,
fence, yes.
so just.
Oh, Identity put it up?
Yep,
or-
they
Oh,
have a
good.
fence.
So
Okay,
that's helping a little bit, just an FYI to you guys, so hopefully that'll help
good.
move forward with that. He didn't know if it was because of you guys putting the pressure on or what it was, but whatever it was, it's up now, so
Well,
that's
they've been
good.
in the paper enough with
Yeah.
negative press that,
Good.
Yeah. Yeah, people are moving out of there too because of that, so.
Because of what? The
No
fence?
parking.
Oh, the no parking, yes. Can't be the fence, yeah.
well, maybe
so
they'll actually get
landscaping is
tenants
looking
that they
good.
were supposed to
Yeah.
target to begin with.
Exactly.
It is.
Along there?
Yeah.
On the path, too.
People will want to walk to.
No cars, that's what
Yeah.
it's supposed to be anyway, so.
Well, with e-bikes, it's getting easier too. I mean, you know,
Hopefully.
yeah. Okay, anything else? I don't want to adjourn the meeting until we're really ready. Okay. Meeting adjourned.